this way if you prefer. Just grab it. Oh, just that? Yeah, you can over to there. No, you can sit wherever you want. Good morning, everyone. My name's Neil McPherson. I'm industry programmer for TIFF, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this Breakfast at TIFF event. I'd like to start by paying my respects to the original keepers of this land by acknowledging the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat. Thank you for hosting us here today and hosting TIFF year-round. I would also like to acknowledge the generosity of our sponsors and supporters who make everything TIFF does possible. Our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris and Visa, and our majority industry supporters, the Ontario Media Development Corporation and Telefilm Canada. When we were discussing the various areas of the industry we might focus on for our next breakfast at TIFF, it soon became very clear that the time was ripe to look at the production landscape in Toronto. There was talk of studio expansions, of investment in film and television via Netflix, of new initiatives from the city promoting Toronto as a production destination, and also a number of recent success stories in film and television produced in Toronto, such as The Handmaid's Tale, It, Alias Grace, and The Shape of Water. We're delighted to have a fantastic panel of guests here to discuss Toronto's role as a production hub, and I'd like to welcome J. Miles Dale, over here next to Sharon. Miles is a producer and director. He made his feature film directorial debut in 2002 with The Skulls 3 and has directed episodes of the series The Strain and Shadowhunters, which was recently nominated for a favourite cable sci-fi fantasy TV show at the People's Choice Awards. His production credits include Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, The Vow, Mama, Carrie, and The Shape of Water, for which he won the Academy Award for Best Picture. To my left is Magali Simard. Magali is the Film Sector Development Officer for the City of Toronto. Prior to joining the city, Magali was curator and senior manager of theatrical programming at Toronto International Film Festival. She's often featured as a cultural leader in Canada, having been profiled by Elle, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, and La Presse. To Magali's left is Justin Cutler. Justin is the Film Commissioner of Ontario at the Ontario Media Development Corporation. Through his role, he promotes the province for the purposes of generating investment in the film and television industry and building capacity, competitiveness, and long-term industry viability. The Commission develops and manages critical business relationships with producers, studios, service providers, vendors, and stakeholders, including trade associations and other organisations. Previous to his role at the OMDC, Justin held the position of Director Industry Office here at TIFF. And to Justin's left is Megan Guy. Megan is the Vice President, Sales and Production Management with Pinewood Group. She has facilitated some of the largest productions in Canada, including Pacific Rim, RoboCop, Pixels, Crimson Peaks, Suicide Squad, Downsizing, and It. Previously, she worked for U Media. Megan's a graduate of Ryerson's RTA programme and is on the advisory committee for Centennial College's radio, TV, film and digital media broadcasting programme. And to lead this morning's conversation is our moderator on my far left, Sharon Lewis. Sharon is a director, showrunner, actor and writer. Her first leading role was in the film Rude as the eponymous Jamaican DJ. She directed and co-wrote the plays Sisters with Maxine Bailey, and her first feature was the award-winning Afrofuturist film Brown Girl Begins, inspired by Nalo Hopkinson's 1998 novel Brown Girl in the Ring. Her next project, Spade, is a neo-noir feature film with a modern twist. Please join me in welcoming our guest for today's breakfast. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good. Everybody all right? Good. So I thought we would start with kind of painting a picture of what's next for Hollywood North, the present. And so I can just speak a little bit, just quickly, about my own personal experience. I'm a director, and I cannot get a crew in this city, so that's good, right? That means it's very busy. And as an actor, I'm going out on a lot of auditions, so that's good, because it means there's a lot happening here. And I was looking at statistics. 30,000 people were employed in Toronto in this industry alone. That's impressive. $1.8 billion generated from the film and television industry in Toronto. And I know we already said this, but we have like an Academy Award winner sitting here. That's kind of exciting. It's a big deal for us. I think it's
dumb luck.
yeah. And that The Shape of Water was actually shot here. And on top of that, we've got Handmaid's Tale. Who here is watching Handmaid's Tale? Yeah. I just saw a couple of episodes. The production value is incredible. And as you know, that's inspired by Margaret Atwood's novel, Canadian writer, lives up in the Annex. And Kari Skogland, who is a Canadian female director, just won a BAFTA for directing one of the episodes. So a lot of high quality happening here as well. So, before we get into the whole discussion, I promise I'll let you guys talk. I want to see Magali Simard, who just came back from LA. Well, not just came back, but you and Mayor John Tory went to LA. You brought a video to say how sexy and amazing Toronto is. I think let's watch this video and see if we agree, and then we'll chat afterwards. All right, let's play this video. It is sexy, very sexy. So Magali, well, you tell me how sexy it is.
1 to 10.
All right, 27. So Magali is the sorry,
No, I
is
know,
the
I
film
forget.
officer in the development office for the city of Toronto.
That's right.
Right? And you went to LA and you showed this video. What was the reception?
So when you show something like this, just because I know there's a lot of, obviously probably 100% of this audience is Canadian and many of you make films. So there's many of you that may not recognize yourself in something like this. This, so you know, is geared towards, in this case, an LA crowd. So it's to attract foreign investment in the city. So it's less about showcasing our domestic productions and more saying, if you make films or TV series like these ones, reminder that we're the ones making them with you, and please bring on some more. So I just want to put that out there, and it's done with our partners such as Pinewood. This is all part of the footage, and the companies that partake in being a part of a trade delegation like the one that we did in Los Angeles with the mayor and 23 companies. So it's formed with the footage from all of these companies. Now, a trailer like this is one thing. If you work in the industry, a trailer may not sway you to go to a jurisdiction or another, but it's part of a sort of larger package of promotion that any jurisdiction does, and I think Justin will be my counterpart or partner and saying like, and then you sell the province, and then Canada might sell itself also. So we concentrate on Toronto, and this is what we come up with. It's very well received. Toronto is, and I think we'll go into like why people want to come here or why people want to stay here if they're already here. But it's an extremely well liked jurisdiction. We meet with every single studio when we're there. We meet with the major streaming services when we're there. And across the board, we get into the nitty gritty. We're not going there to be a tap on the back, like, aren't we great? And hope that we hear this back from investors there or production companies. We want to hear the real potential issues. But first and foremost, they all say, we're happy to talk with you, but just so you know, we love to come here. Build more, will come more. Like, that's the main.
So there's already a warm reception there.
There's
you're not really having to.
From infrastructure quality, the like world-class studios, world-class crews. That's something we hear constantly. Is like some people really claim that we have the best crews in the world, and that's why they come back. Vancouver, it might be quicker in distance. It's a quicker flight from LA, but if you realize that they will ship entire crews to work with our crews here, that are larger than theirs, to be here, that's very meaningful to make that extra major trip and relocate people.
So when you go, you're feeling, and when we watch this, the perception is that Toronto's doing really well. And when we look at the numbers, Toronto's doing really well. Megan Guy, who is the VP of Sales and Production Management at Pinewood Group, which, to let you know, is growing faster than, I think, the Marvel Universe. You guys are good. You guys are doing well. Give us the global perspective. Because you guys have production offices all over the world, do you think that Toronto is up there? Like, are we sort of patting ourselves on the back?
Yeah, I mean, Toronto's definitely up there. Obviously, we've been around for 81 years. Our mothership is in the UK. UK has always been a really important jurisdiction for us. We also have a studio in Atlanta, which, is competition to Toronto. It does a lot of different types of feature film that like to make their homes there. But for Toronto, because we have the talent, we live here. Our heads of department, they live here now. We have an amazing domestic production industry here. So it's not like people are coming in, shooting movies and leaving. We live here. And for us, with Pinewood, that's kind of a unique situation. We have the Dominican Republic, which they introduced their own tax credit. A little bit, it's a little bit tricky right now, but
what's tricky about it?
Well, it's a lot of the studios, they don't trust it, and I think having a tax credit that's trustworthy, like we have in Toronto and we have in Ontario, is the main reason right now why these foreign productions are coming here. I don't know, Justin, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the financial incentives that we offer in Ontario are incredibly stable. They're bankable. And it's a major reason for why productions come here. But I don't think it's the only reason. I think, going back to what other people have said, I think it's highly skilled talent that's proven through projects like The Shape of Water or Handmaid's Tale, American Gods, etc. At the Ontario Film Commission, we're the first contact for about 90% of the projects that want to film in Ontario, both domestic and foreign. And we do a lot of their initial location scouting. And it's a consistent message. The world wants to be here. It's just whether or not we've got the space and the talent available. But 2 years we maxed out at 42 concurrent productions happening in the province. We are able to handle that, and I know that our unions are doing a lot of work to increase their workflow or their members to handle that business.
So Miles, we think it's a great city. You've brought productions here. Why do you bring productions here? What is it about Toronto?
I like sleeping in my own bed.
Right.
It's really simple. I like my kids more than per diem. There's a lot to be proud of here. There's something to be said for developing a cadre of people that you work with where there's a shorthand. We like that, you bring some expertise to a city. Like, again, people will tell me where they want to shoot their movies, and then, I'll call Justin or Janice Reed Johnson over there, and they'll do a photo pack, and I'll be like, oh, take a look at this. And they'll be, yeah, that's pretty good. So why don't you come and have a look around, and hop in a van, and, eventually you sort of win them over. It's like a bait and switch.
Is there
thing that
often
I've
surprise?
developed.
Is there surprise that Toronto's offering this? Or are they sort of like, oh,
No,
yeah, Toronto?
it's not a big surprise, like when, everyone's been here. They've been here to TIFF, or they've been here for some reason or another, and so there's a familiarity. It's close enough. It's safe. It's friendly. So it's a pretty easy sell. In reality, it's, as everyone says it's a stable tax credit. It's a great crew base. You don't have to bring anybody. So it's actually, if you can get the locations part of it, like again, I was telling these guys before, we've got another movie out in Vancouver right now where the director says, I need mountains. I need big mountains. I was like, well, I got no mountains on me. There's no, it's an escarpment or a hill is not going to do it. So there's certain things, if you're doing Castaway, you're not going to, there's no like Lost at Sea situation here. So,
although we do have a very big
yeah,
lake.
you go to the
Our
island.
lake is big.
Right, go to the other side of Toronto Island. Yeah, okay, I tried
We
that
can make
already.
it work. We can make it work.
I like your style. Yeah,
But
they come and work for me. But it's well known. It's safe. It's stable. It's predictable. And then when you get here, everyone's happy. It's like Guillermo came here in 1996 for Mimic, and then he went and made all kinds of movies in Spain and everywhere else. He survived the Weinsteins here on Mimic, which is amazing in itself.
Right.
And then 15 years later, he came and did Pacific Rim. And Legendary suggested, why don't we go there? And he embraced it because he knew people, and some of the same people worked on that movie that had worked on Mimic 15 years prior. And then, we did Mama, and then we did 3 years of The Strain, 4 years of The Strain, and then we did, Shape of Water. And he continues to be, now, not everybody is Guillermo. We'd love more Guillermos.
Yes.
But, that's just it. You find a place that you like and you stay with it. So I think that a lot of people, there's a lot of return business, both in film and television. And I think that's a testament to, our infrastructure, our city, our tax credits, our everything, and we need more studios. Megan's sick of hearing it.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to build a studio, do it.
But that's really a good point, because I think that's part of what Mayor John Tory was saying, right? Is that we're building, we're going, but we need the infrastructure to catch up. And how is Pinewood answering that? Call.
We're about to open one new soundstage and some support, which is a little bit of a step forward at 10,000 square foot. The plan is, now that we have this amazing new shareholder with Bell Media Studios, we're going to be building.
Did you guys know that Bell Media had bought into Pinewood? Yes. Yeah.
It's exciting, and we're excited to have Bell.
What does that mean to my phone bill?
Right in cable.
Pass. But we're about to announce more stages being built over the next few years. So it's exciting and it's needed, and we want more competition. We love more studio operators building in Toronto, because it means we have a permanent industry. We don't just have these people, like I said, coming into the city, shooting, leaving, taking their equipment with them. We have the equipment, we have the people, we have the studios, tax credit, the infrastructure, the culture, I think, is another big selling point.
Mm-hmm. How do we get more studios built here?
So right now, the situation, and that's what we hear everywhere, like in a way any jurisdiction could say what we're saying about how great we are. It's every time you have a little differentiator that you really have to hammer down for people. And in this case, when you hear your biggest problem is will come more if you have more space, it's a pretty great first statement to do. Now, executing on that is another story. So the recent announcements of Pinewood/Bell now and their imminent expansions in the next couple of years. Cinespace Studios has had recent announcements, both at Kipling at their current space and down in the Portlands as well. And then the city has purchased at the end of last year Shoreline Studios that was going offline, and the city basically, with great input from the industry, and we may want to touch on how the industry is very much a part of decision making for any government level.
Well, how did the industry get involved in the
Well,
Shoreline
a Shoreline case is we need every square foot we can to keep this momentum alive. We're growing. The second we stop for 2-3 years of growth in terms of space, people will stop coming, and the message that goes around just becomes, oh yeah, Toronto is great, but it's always full, like don't bother kind of thing. So we want to always prevent that and have real answers for that. So Shoreline Studio is not a huge studio. It's mainly like for small to medium size, typically TV production and commercials into Portlands as well, was shutting down because the owners literally passed away and the family didn't want to keep it as a film studio, so decided to sell it. Canada Post purchased it to do a distribution site, and everybody freaked out, understandably, to say, are we going to lose precious space to something that's not film use? So the city intervened at the end of last year, purchased it back from Canada Post to make sure It's going to stay as film used, and it's currently up for a request for proposal. So people, studio operators, are applying to run the place. You'll hear about the answer to who will run it in the next, I would say, month and a half.
Great.
And then, but that's one existing site. But then there's land. There's also unbuilt stuff to imagine like great studios of the future. So we have 2 sites in the Portland that are being rezoned for film use only, so that a condo bid cannot win, so that any type of other business cannot go on those lands. Film employment only, and film employment is essentially film studios with offices or post-production space.
No Ferris wheels, no, right?
No Ferris wheels,
Yay.
as cool as they are.
Justin, I also wanted to talk a little bit about not just Toronto, because there's also filming going on outside of Toronto. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest attractions to Ontario is, as Miles said, the locations that we can offer. We have 90 regions throughout Ontario where we have liaisons that represent those regions, municipalities, cities, townships that are constantly bringing us locations for our locations database. So we've got 10,000 locations in Ontario that are film friendly. We've got 350,000 images of those locations. So we can pretty much deliver everything that a producer wants when they come, even mountains at times. Molly's game, for the record. The mogul scene was shot at Beaver Valley. So we can make anything happen.
You're going to hear it all through this.
And Jumbo Stage. And Jumbo Stage. Yeah.
Had only I known about Beaver Valley.
We tried. But you know, I mean, we've got 3 million square feet of stage space, and that's a mixture of purpose-built, converted warehouses, and then raw warehouse space. What we're really trying to do is get out of the raw warehouse game and into more purpose-built. So we're really excited about.
Why out of the raw warehouse?
You know, just to have the additional capacity of soundproofing, proper ventilation. Again, more control. Yeah, and security.
And also, we also have a very strong VFX production here. Is that part of what brought you here, Miles?
Well, VFX is pretty competitive throughout Canada. You know, a lot of the big companies have set up in various places. You know, MPC. I was just at MPC in Vancouver yesterday. They have 400 employees there. They have 800 in Montreal. So between BC, Ontario, and Quebec, it's a very competitive business, and it's very much on the radar of all the studios. So almost in a way outsized to our production business. And there have been some great leaders. You know, Mr. X, who I consider to be the preeminent visual effects company in, you know, certainly Ontario and Canada, is now part of Technicolor. And it's a big business. So that's part of a driver where, you know, you can come here and you can have all of your visual effects infrastructure, you know, all that staffing, you know, right on the ground. So it is a big part of it.
Yeah, because for years, post-production wasn't necessarily done here. VFX wasn't done here. And then the Strain, VFX was done here, right?
Yeah, the Strain, we did all of our, we did really everything but offline here. And, you know, that's really the money is in sound and picture and VFX, and we did all that here. Yeah, we did that all at Technicolor, Mr. X and Strain.
And even one more thing to that is that not only was that the case before, now you also get projects that are mainly only post-produced here. So we can attract also just that. If a film or a TV series can absolutely not, for say mountains or whatever reason.
Tropical islands. Yeah.
God, now it's like a complex. We're going to build a mountain.
Yeah,
that's all we're going to talk about.
I didn't want to start a thing with the mountains. Can you build some mountains as well?
Well,
with the studios and build some mountains.
And now
But I mean,
attracting,
I think.
sorry, now attracting certain projects for post-production only. Like post-production is literally like $400 million a year in the city. Like it's a huge, and the fastest growing one, it does need a bit less physical space to operate.
So is that a sector that you guys are pursuing actively? Is that a sector we should be pursuing actively?
Yeah, I mean, on the provincial level, we've really taken VFX quite seriously. We think it's one of the biggest areas for capacity growth. It's cheap on capital costs for the most part, cheaper than building studios, and in some instances,
Less space,
and we have the academic institutions that can supply that pipeline to the companies. So it's really exciting for us. We actually ran a visual effects FAM tour. We brought up 10 key post-production supervisors last year to tour our facilities and meet our talent, and we're already, you know, landing projects from that. So it's really exciting for us.
Megan, is there a certain area that Pinewood Group is interested in, like post-production or VFX, or is it all across the board? Is Toronto attractive for one particular sector?
Well, Pinewood in the UK, especially, we have creative services. We used to do we ended doing 3D digital printing, but we had a whole props department. We still do some of that, but we have digital post. So I mean, for Toronto, it really is soundstage based the way that we are set up here. But I mean, there's always potential to expand, Pinewood Post and Pinewood Digital moving forward. I mean, watch this space.
Are you guys worried at all, or is there any worry that, The Expanse isn't coming back, Taken isn't coming back, Designated?
Oh, The Expanse is coming back.
Oh, it's coming back?
yeah.
Did Netflix
Amazon.
pick it up? Oh,
Amazon.
Amazon
Yeah.
picked it up. Oh, so we're not worried at all.
We're not.
There was a
there's no
fan
worries
referendum
at all.
vote.
This is great.
Feet on the table.
We're worried about the stories.
Right,
Yeah. Space is endless.
right. Yes, you're right. Thanks, Miles. And we have space here, so you don't have to go anywhere else. Right, we've got space here in Toronto. We're very insecure. I feel very insecure right now. Please build a mountain, somebody, so that they come back here. But there has been some shifts, right? Taken, I think, is gone. Designated Survivor isn't coming back.
Shows get
Shadowhunters.
canceled and picked up, and there'll be other things to take their place, and that's just the reality of the market. I mean, the fact is, Amazon and Netflix, you look at Brooklyn Nine-Nine and now The Expanse and a number of other shows, the streamers are picking up a lot of shows that are getting dropped by the network. So that'll all continue. The fact is there's more shows. There used to be 3 networks and 40 shows, and now there's 1,000 shows. Netflix alone has, hundreds of shows. So it feels like the content is there. You need the creative talent for all of that, which is, obviously the biggest thing. And then you need the space to do it. So there's lots of opportunity for us there if we have the space to shoot it.
So it sounds like the biggest challenge right now is making sure that we build it so that they will come, making sure that we keep up with that. And how do we do that? I know that are we going to give more incentives? Is the city working towards, or the province working towards giving incentives for that to happen? Or
I think, on the provincial level, we obviously have a very generous tax credit program. It's something that has been considered and raised to us, and I think it's still under evaluation. But what we are trying to do is try to identify new land, both in Toronto and outside of Toronto, that might be available, that's provincially owned or otherwise. We work with property brokers to put those spaces into the hands of the developers, and we try to broker the conversations that need to happen to develop the financing.
I was reading that 75% of the studio rentals are foreign. So that means that we're depending on foreign rentals to keep this industry going. Are we at all, does that keep us vulnerable in any kind of way? Is there specific moves to build the domestic industry as well?
Maybe just to touch on that, I'm sure Megan probably has something to say. But what we think is one of our greatest strengths is that Ontario actually has a 50-50 ratio of domestic to foreign product being produced in the province, which most jurisdictions can't say for themselves. So it's very exciting for us. If the currency fluctuates, then we're in a more robust situation. Right?
If there are interesting tax trade or trade things going on.
Well, what a lot of people don't know is that really the business here in Ontario was built mostly on foreign, and now the domestic business, as Justin says, is 50-50. So you've got, it used to be that was, foreign was meat, potatoes, and gravy. And now the foreign is really the gravy. The tent poles are, where everybody kind of gets fat. But without that, you've still got a really robust business with the domestic business. So it's a the exchange rate goes bad. Even if the tax credit, which we're hoping it doesn't, changes a little bit. You've got a domestic business that doesn't rely on the dollar or any of those things.
Right. So you feel like we're not as invulnerable a position as we have been in the past, because the domestic industry is stronger
Much
than
stronger.
it's been. Yeah. I think that the stat though was for studio rentals specifically, 75% is foreign owned. So if we're building large studios, which have a large cost, that 75% of that is dependent on foreign. Is that a worry, or do you feel like the domestic industry will pick up that slack if the dollar changes or if the tax incentives change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think over the past 3 years, domestic producers have felt a bit of a squeeze in certain studio spaces, and I think that will be combated by these additions at Pinewood and CineSpace.
Well, what that it doesn't recognize as well is that those domestic shows, they're in warehouses, or they're in all those. They're here, and they're using spaces that may not technically be called studios or stages, but they're out there. So they just get pushed down into less expensive less heated.
And
True.
we still need we still need those less expensive studios too. We still need to keep those converter warehouses and the more cost-effective studios for our domestic production to be filming in. Even for a television series, they're shooting up at Downsview and different
Wallace
converter warehouses,
Studios.
and they're making do, and it's great. So we need more of everything.
And on the very positives of, because there's always the question like, oh, if they take all this space, or they, what does it leave for us? And as Justin says, like, it's really 50-50 what the types of the numbers that we're talking about. But to think that the Canadian crews are being trained on the biggest shows on earth, like Star Trek Discovery, for example, right now for years, means when they go either back or in the meantime to work on domestic projects, the training that's priceless training. I mean, this is literally the greatest shows and the greatest films, in some cases being made here and being trained on for months or years at a time, really. So I think I cannot overstate how much it can elevate the crews that we have and have made them into what they are. We've done that to ourselves, but we also have foreign investment to thank for that.
Yeah, it absolutely makes us much more competitive internationally, the
big time.
cruise. Miles, is there any difference? Do you see any difference between American and Canadian crews?
I mean, it's different regionally. What you find, I mean, the Los Angeles crews are one thing. That's the home of, movie making. The New York crews are another thing, a little more vinegar, a little more attitude. Through the rest of the U.S., it tends to be a bit of a carpetbagger business, really. It's a gypsy culture where, when North Carolina has their credit, they'll live there, and then they'll move to Louisiana, and then they'll move to Atlanta, and they just kind of follow the money and the work and the tax credits. So, again, I feel like the cohesion here, where everybody has worked with everybody, I prefer to have a bunch of people who have worked together, know each other, have that shorthand, than a bunch of people who are meeting each other for the first time, where something interesting might happen. It's like that chemistry project that I talk about. It's a petri dish, and it's going to be different, and you see what happens. But I'd rather have the other thing where you've already got the chemistry proven. Again, Canadians are sort of, stereotypically considered nice and, genteel and everything else. But
Are we?
Well, we are to the rest of the world. Maybe not here. There's a spectrum, ranging from really nice people to full-blown assholes. But it's I've heard anyway. But you do see some differences, and people come here and they legitimately say, like, this is the best crew I've ever worked with, or this is the nicest crew, or there's chemistry, there's not a lot of sparks. So you see it, and again, in Europe, it's all different, and it tends to be sort of culturally specific, and there are big differences. But ultimately, I think that the crews here are very well regarded, and that's a big part of our success, is that people come back. And when you get return business, that's the best indicator of the level of quality of your crew. Mm-hmm. So I've shot in a number of places, and I do think I may have some hometown bias, but we're as good as anybody here.
And do you think that, because we're talking a lot about how working on American productions, big productions, obviously elevate the crew and elevate the experience and give us that competitive edge, does it work the other way? Like, is there any kind of influence that Canadians are having on Americans?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as Ontario producers do build up their skills and can access new financing models, we're seeing more co-venture work across the border in lieu of a co-production treaty. So Ontario producers are being seen as, obviously far more viable to those partners in the States, which is great.
So what's the future look like? If this is where we're at and it's healthy and it's strong, what does the future look like? What is the target for Toronto? What is it that we want to see? Do we want to be on par with LA? Do we want to be a particular type of place to shoot? This is where you go for VFX. Do we want to be across the board? Anybody can answer that on the panel.
I think we want it all.
Yeah.
We want all of the above. I think, we are pretty reliant on our tax credits. So, I mean, in an ideal situation, maybe a little bit less reliant on the dollar, the exchange, and the tax credit. Obviously, new jurisdictions are going to come up with better tax credits. So we're always going to have competition. So it's really, what is our own cultural fingerprint that we can give to the world for them coming to Toronto? I think that's what we need to start looking at a bit more.
I mean, one of the things that I think Toronto offers is multicultural. We're a really multicultural society, and I think, often our cities have played for other American cities and can do that well.
Yeah, and I have to say, when we were on our trip, when one person mentioned, they said, they were kind of praising like the livability of the city, and it's, you can go shoot many places, but it's kind of an extra strong bonus when it's an amazing city to eat in, and like go in the neighborhoods and the proximity of our, the places you shoot and this and that, and the utilization of the streets and name it. And they said, and it's a very diverse city, and by the way, you should say that more and showcase it more. And I think sometimes we think, because we think it in our head, that everybody knows that, or that it's been our message and therefore everybody knows it. But they say you actually have it in reality, whereas others say it but don't have it. You should pump that more. Now, if 51% of Torontonians were not born here, the industry has yet to represent that. These are numbers that are recent. It's natural that a full industry would not respond to these numbers immediately, but that's some things that the unions, the education institutions, the guilds are all hyper aware of, and are working on each in their program ways or numbers ways to make this more of a reality, and to really showcase, from actor, from people in front of the camera to behind the camera to on the set at all levels. It's something that's very top of mind, and I think we do understand that maybe that's something we need to hammer down even more than we may have.
Yeah, I mean, I completely support that. I think the first question we hear from most of the companies when we're down in LA is how diverse is Toronto and Ontario. And sometimes they're amazed to hear how diverse it actually is. Luckily, that's not the common thing. People think, oh yeah, no, Toronto is a diverse place. But that the unions and the guilds are doing a great job at promoting that. I know that NABED is now getting involved with the Pathway to Industry program, which is going to open up a number of diverse opportunities for new crew members and apprentices. And ACTRA has done just a recent casting Go See, which put 70 diverse performers in front of some of the top casting agents in America. So it's great.
Yeah, I think I know I was in an interview with BET for this show that they're shooting here called In Contempt, and part of the conversations we were having, they're like, "Are there Black people here?" I'm like, yes, there's more than me. Like, they're really, there's a bunch of us. But I think we do need to work hard to sort of change that perception, sort of Canada of the North maybe not being as
and get
diverse.
the real numbers. Like, we can say it as much as we want, but if you show up and the entire crew is Caucasian, that's your answer, right? So it has to be very different. And it's diversity, and it's women in non-traditional roles on film sets. So it's a huge part of it, and it's very top of mind for everybody, clearly. And that's something we need to do as it grows. So you say, like, what's the growth? Like, what should it look like? We all want the everything, I think, to your answer. Like, we want all the shows, we want it to be bigger, we want to double our numbers and this and that. But we have to legitimately assess how much growth through how many years you can absorb, and how that works both in infrastructure, and you don't want the union to suddenly have way too many crews and no jobs because there's not enough space. So it has to really be concurrent, and that's a tough puzzle and Jenga puzzle. Well, no, Jenga insinuates that it will fall off one day. Sorry, not at all. A solid tower to be built. Terrible.
See how easy the metaphor can fall apart?
God.
The whole
And now we're
industry
gonna be all
tumbling
over her.
down like that. Yeah.
And also as it grows, is the Torontonians that live here that are not this is probably a crowd and a panel of people are very sympathetic to having a film shoot in their neighborhood and think it's cool, but not everybody thinks that, and you have to really. There's a huge PR message that has to be enhanced in the next few years, and we're doing work now, but we have to do more to ingrain in people's brains and hearts that this is a fabric of being a Torontonian. This industry there's finance, food, and film and TV are the top three industries and economic boosters for the city. So you have to accept it. This is what they might give back to your community. So we have to work on these things where clearly productions give back in certain areas of the city, and to show that those 30,000 people that are employed live and breathe in your neighborhoods. It's not Hollywood comes, loiters, and goes back and makes their money. It's people that live here, that there are artists at all levels of these productions that are really a part of it. Because it used to be, when the industry was not as big, like say 12 years ago, even less years ago, where people were flattered that there was a film truck in their street. Like, oh my God, my street will be, my house might be, I might walk by casually with my coffee. And now you get complaints about their parking spots being taken like too many times a year. So you have to be it's a fine line, and I think we have to be sympathetic to both sides. The industry has to be able to thrive and use the city, because it's an amazing city to showcase. When we say like, come, it's an amazing city to shoot in, you need to make these streets available for them too. And on the flip side, mitigate what it might mean for residents. And we have the summertime for everybody it's the biggest time for film shoots, especially in a place that has a winter. Your summer is really like double whammy. And we're meeting with, Justin and I and our colleagues are in touch with especially the majors that will take a lot of space in certain places to like take it early on and say like, okay, let's see everything we can, and we'll look at the Google map of that area, of that neighborhood, to say like, what can we do better to disrupt people less?
And how do you go out there? Like, do you go out and go, hey, do you want to meet so-and-so? Because they're going to be shooting on your show. Like, how do you get them to...
Well, it's often, parking is literally like as dry
it's a
as
legitimate...
people's parking spots is really like one of the big things. Noise, not so much. Film crews are actually not so loud. Often, especially if it's like in a house in a neighborhood, it's shot inside, so it's not really loud. But we're working on, like, right now, one of the biggest sequels of a film that was in this trailer is being shot this summer, and it made quite a lot of noise. I guess I can say
What
this
is
is annoying.
it?
Now I'm just going to
just
reference
say it.
something you don't know. But it was shot here, of course, and there was a lot of stuff in the news about that neighborhood it was shot in. And in the end, it comes down to, like, a few complaints that get blown out of proportion sometimes. But they're coming back this summer for the sequel, and we're ecstatic to have this huge, massive, amazing production come back, but it means we have to be careful about like where can we relocate maybe their crews and their trucks and this and that to make sure it's less disruptive. Maybe we go talk to that neighborhood more, both as city and both as them, because we understand we're not there to protect one over the other. We're there to make it a win-win for everybody.
Go ahead, Megan.
I was just going to say, and just on that, I mean, with it, that is a movie that is, the story's based in New England. So when we're also talking about diversity, yes, our city is diverse, but also our locations are diverse. And they shoot a lot in Port Hope and a lot around the city and the suburbs. And, we double as a lot of different places, not just Chicago, Detroit, New York, LA, but New England, small town, fishing village.
I am not going to mention mountains again. I won't mention mountains. Thanks.
Well, we're actually making a big push right now to promote Ontario as a Midwestern look as well, and a suburban look. People come, like as Miles said, for TIFF. They're here, they're in the downtown core, but they don't always know what's outside. And so we do our best to really expose them to those diverse locations.
I did shoot a little short film, and I shot Toronto for Jamaica. So there you go. Yeah. It's never been shown anywhere, but but it was awesome. I think I'm going to bring it out to the audience. Are you guys cool with that? Yeah. I think we'd love to hear questions from the audience. Is that good? There's a question here. Hi. We're going to bring a mic to you. Yeah. So we'll just stare awkwardly at you until it gets here. Is that cool? Yeah. So make it a really good one. No pressure.
No pressure at all. Good morning, all. Thank you for your insight. It's curious to me that it wasn't forecasted ahead of time that the growth that we were going to have and why the building didn't start maybe 5, 6, 10 years ago in forecasting for this growth.
So you're curious as to why it took so long to get the growth started?
No, I'm talking in terms of building and preparing the studios, knowing and forecasting the growth we were going to have.
Honestly, the growth over the last 5 years has been so rapid that I think people in some ways are catching up. We've grown 65% in terms of our production volume over that time, and it takes a lot of time to identify lands, get the financing together for these types of projects. And I'm not sure if people really had forecasted that across the industry. But I don't know, maybe Miles has a different...
Well, as an example, in a film port, Pinewood was built as film port in 2008, was it? And the dollar at that point was beyond par. It was well beyond par. And Filmport in the first year was empty. So it was a ghost town, and everyone was saying, oh, my God, have we made the worst mistake we've ever made? And so, when you have to predict those economic cycles, it gets difficult when you're putting $50 or $60 million on the line. So I understand why it didn't happen, in the wake of that. It got busy again. and now it's been very busy, but it does take a while to catch up, and it takes a while to get the financing together. It's not small dollars, so it just becomes an economic gamble. Now it doesn't seem like a big gamble, but as recently as a few years ago, it did.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, back then when the studio was Filmport, there was no projects coming in. We had these big stages, big purpose-built stages, and we weren't getting the projects that we wanted to keep the doors open, to keep growing. And that's actually one of the reasons Pinewood became involved, was with the shareholders. They wanted a global brand to come in and have that scope with the LA producers. So, that's part of the big reason that Total Recall came in, because we went to LA and pulled them in, right? Total Recall was the first, and they called it the movie that saved Toronto. Yeah. And that's, we grew from there. So, well, it's in an article. It's in a Toronto Star article I have on my wall.
Yeah.
Well, I guess
I'll send you a picture.
that comes with the film that you did in terms of advertising and enticing, and continuing to do that.
And also, I'll just add, there's often political considerations in acquiring land, right? There's often, I'll just say that diplomatically, that with the Portland.
And engineering as well. If you look at the land, we're pretty close to the water table. So to build a stage that can support the amount of weight you need to, put on the ground and suspend from the roof, you have to engineer and dig into the bedrock. And that's not cheap. That's expensive. You need a lot of money for that, a lot of investment.
Thank you for that question. Anybody else? There's one here and one there.
Good morning, everyone. I'm curious as what kind of investment partnerships are being sought after to help with this infrastructure in the zoned areas that have been zoned by the City of Toronto for film infrastructure and studios?
So, like, say a studio is interested in building, what type of financing they're looking for?
Yeah, like, are there partnerships being made with current developers?
With developers, for sure, mainly with private. So with developers, banks are reticent to enter that game. As we say, like, the cycles are tough to predict. So banks are not the biggest backers for financing for studios. Just anything to
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add that the banks are a bit reticent just because it's a short-term lease structure. So most productions come in for 6 months. They're not like a Smart Center booking for 5 or 10 years for a gap. It's a riskier business. So that's one of the main reasons why it's been difficult to get the financing together. So the industry has approached different levels of government to find out what may be available. And I know Toronto has a great, the IMIT program. There are brownfield remediation programs that help with the ancillary issues around building a studio, but not for the actual infrastructure itself. So that is a big conversation at the government level.
Great, thank you.
And there was a question back there. Can we? Yeah. And then I'll echo it out. Yeah, go ahead. His name is Benjamin, and he's a Toronto filmmaker.
Let the man speak.
What's the appetite for a film studio an hour outside of Toronto?
I think Doug Ford would like the whole Greenbelt to be film studios. That'll be perfect.
Wow, you mentioned Weinstein and Doug Ford all in
Why
one.
not?
Wow, you're so brave.
There are
Miles.
definitely developers circling the entire GTA. A big consideration right now is where the studio zone starts and begins. Right, looking out to the west. What is it?
Well, Hamilton has definitely been discussed. I've talked to 2 or 3 people. Guillermo famously tweeted out something about a film studio that attracted way more attention than we wanted. But Hamilton has definitely been discussed as a location for a film studio.
Yeah, I mean, lots of locations around the city have been looked at, I think. Just as an example, in Atlanta, our studio is 45 minutes outside the city, and it's really hard to get people to want to leave more than 10, 15 minutes away from the downtown core. And, what they say about the studio, about the in the Portlands with Cinespace, Pinewood, Shoreline, everyone, they call it the studio district, and people are reticent to go past that and past Bloor. I've had comments saying, is it past Bloor? I'm not going past Bloor.
Yeah.
Which is a crazy argument, because to go from Santa Monica to Burbank is like a 3-hour trip for anyone who lives there.
yeah.
So that's something we're trying to overcome, and it comes through doing familiarization tours, getting the executives up and bringing them through the city and the surrounding areas. And Tribro Studios actually has plans to be building in Pickering right now, a fairly large facility. So, that'll be a great test to see how.
Maybe we can use that Hamilton Airport at some point. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, speaking on Hamilton, further to looking at studio building there, what about the unions? Are the unions open now more than they were in the recent past about going there and sort of having, because you have to have the union on board to have a studio built, right? So the travel issue is a big problem and all of that. So have the unions been up? I mean, I'm sure they're up to date, but I'm wondering, is there a move now that they're more open to the idea of having expansions? Like,
Ask him. He's right there.
okay, no, just a general.
No,
question.
actually Hamilton, as an example, the unions have been very flexible about coming up with arrangements to make it affordable to shoot in Hamilton. And I suspect that anyone who gets serious about building a studio there and spending millions of dollars would talk to the unions first and have some sort of agreement.
But there are, I guess, I'm just my question is, sorry, are they open to the idea that that's an actual reality given the shortage of space?
Are they open to the reality of moving out to Hamilton?
Well, because I think what happened recently, I guess, is my understanding is that there's been more hesitancy to have their union members go there because of 12-hour days and travel times are expanded and stuff, and it creates a risk for the crew. And that's what's happening, and because of the travel time. So either we expand the highway, figure out time travel.
Those both
You know what I mean?
great solutions.
So I mean, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So at least maybe there's an inventor here somewhere. But you know what I mean? So that's all. I was just wondering, that's all. Is the union going to say, you know what, Hamilton is, because of the limitations of space, there is opportunities? Because I know Pinewood looks at that and like all these things. So that's all. It's just, I've heard that there's a hesitancy to do so.
Well, I would imagine the same thing in going from Burbank to Santa Monica, trying to shoot, and if you live in the valley and trying to get out, right, that as long as you're getting paid overtime and those union rules are being addressed, I assume that's an issue. But if there is somebody here from the union that would like to talk
Well, you
about
can
that.
make Hamilton your Monty. Am I right? You can make Hamilton your zone.
Where's Monty?
Monty.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, hi, Monty.
Okay,
There's Monty Montgomery. He's the head of IATSE.
Hi, Monty. We're going to bring a mic to you if you don't mind.
He's been servicing Hamilton film production for 60 years. Thank you. We've been servicing film productions in Hamilton for 60 years. Many of our shows go out to Hamilton and that surrounding area to shoot, sometimes for short durations, sometimes for longer durations. We do have in our contract a more of a travel incentive to film in Hamilton. We call it the Hamilton Zone provision. It makes it more cost effective to shoot in the Hamilton region than it would be going other directions outside of the current studio zone. So we already have made some concessions for people to be able to film out there more easily and more cost effectively. I would say this, most of our members live in Toronto, many in the East End. And the reality is that you have cast and you have crew. And if given an option to film in a studio in Toronto that is a 15-minute drive from a hotel for talent or a 20-minute drive for crew, that's probably going to be more attractive for a number of the people producing. Once you get, if I'm a member of a crew who calls in available for work and I get offered 5 or 6 different productions and one of them's in Hamilton, 4 of them are 10 minutes from my house, I'm going to take the one more times than not 10 minutes from my home. And that's just a reality of Hamilton. So when you're busy in the city and you have a show out in Hamilton, it will inherently get a little more difficult to film out there based on how busy Toronto is. But the crews will go out to Hamilton, and they have.
And what is great about Hamilton is if it is busy in the city, then smaller productions will go out to Hamilton. That gives them an opportunity to go out there and shoot out there as well. Right?
And then just to add to that, there is an incentive, a tax incentive for traveling
Yes.
outside of the GTA on the domestic tax credit. So you get 35% for your eligible labor for a domestic project, and there's a 10% bump on top of that for our regional bonus.
That's right.
That sometimes offsets some of those expenses.
That's right. Any other questions? Over here?
Hi. Hi there. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your time and your comments. I've really enjoyed this talk. I think it's been very positive, but practically so, grounded in reality, really. And I have a question regarding something that Magali said in regards to how some LA crews, when they come to Toronto, there's a sort of really beneficial scenario where LA crews will sort of nurture Toronto crews in this sort of on the field capacity, and it's very sort of, as praxis, it's sort of like as they go. And that sort of got me thinking about content development and how that is a little bit of an issue in terms of our writing right now and the sort of the stories that are being that could be nurtured more in our sort of media scene in film and television. And I was wondering if there's any sort of possibility for that kind of type of mentorship. As as Megan had mentioned, we want it all. We want not just studio, not just crew, but potentially better, stronger stories as well.
So you're asking if there's a more formal mentorship program?
Yeah, if there's some sort of if we can see this type of scenario, not just this mentorship or this unofficial mentorship in crews, but also on the writing side. Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting. I mean, I can't answer, I think, truly to that question, but a few examples of late, or the chief example of late, I would say, is Netflix partnering with l'INIS in Montreal to develop students and through writing partially. And that's matching people, that's mentorship, that's a real program and investment. Now we need to see way more of these than like one school in one city that, in this case, is not even ours. And there's a screenwriters conference coming up later this month, actually hosted, I think, here at the Lightbox. And they are flying in a lot of showrunners and writers from the US. Now these are, I totally get where you're going, and I think that's an amazing idea, because I think on the ground is when like physical cast crew like get the help, but maybe not on the development side is what you're basically pointing to, right?
And I also know that there's been some initiatives from the DGC as well to formalize that kind of shadowing on that side. So maybe on the WGC, on the Writers Guild, formalizing that. Did anybody else want to respond?
I think it actually goes to a bigger point that I was going to make earlier. A part of what we need to do to keep our eye on the ball and not be complacent, grow the business, is training. We've talked to Monty and the guys at NABET and everything. So you need your training programs. You've got the the Sheridans and all those schools. Pixar and Disney all recruit very heavily out of Sheridan. They're animators. So that's a particular success story in terms of our local training. So, whether it's below the line in terms of crew training or writing or mentorship, a lot of the writing, frankly, tends to stay in LA. I think we might be a little bit more on our own on that side of it. You'll see even the TV shows that are shooting here, the writers' rooms are all in LA, other than the domestic shows. So, obviously, the Film Center and other places like that, those things, as the business gets bigger, will grow. But we do have to keep our eye on training and make sure we, keep up with that part of it.
How do we get the writers' rooms over here? Is it through training? Is it through, I don't know, space shuttle? Get them.
Time travel
right?
again?
Yeah.
I think it's difficult. I mean, that's where they want to be. And, that, frankly, if you're a great TV writer, even, our TV writers, a lot of the great, Canadian showrunners who were here are now there,
True.
So that's where the business is. That's where you pitch. So, just keep working, and ideally there are some mentor programs here. Maybe there could be more.
Mm-hmm. Any other question?
Hi.
Sorry. Go
Hi
ahead.
there. I just wanted to ask if there's been any information given from the new Ontario government as to what their take is on the film industry, and if they plan to further support all the initiatives and the goals that we have moving forward. Yeah.
Sorry, easy answer is no. we don't have.
No
I don't have any
information
information. It's far too early to tell.
I don't think he's officially taken over yet, right? Yeah.
No. Okay. Okay.
Look, I think to get him off the stick, the last time the Liberal government, made a slight adjustment in the tax credit, having promised the industry pretty formally and many, many times that they wouldn't, it caused a giant ripple through the business. And hopefully we will be able to advocate, through industry groups, through the OMDC, to the new government, that they shouldn't do that. That there's a lot of data that suggests a big spin-off effect, multiple great multiples of economic benefits, and there's enough information to suggest to them that to change it would be harmful and to leave it would be very beneficial.
Hopefully this panel is streaming directly to that new government.
Yeah.
There was a question here. Okay. We'll come to you.
Does the City of Toronto and or OMDC have a position within the organization, within the city, where the responsibility is to foster the increased diversity, both in front of the camera and behind? And I know you may mention about unions and et cetera, but what is the city and OMDC doing specifically to help ensure that this city that has all this diversity actually ends up being reflected, really reflected?
Great. Thanks.
I mean, it's in the hands of the industry first and foremost. We're here to, in a way, gather them to think this through and for us to put that on a platform when it's time to really showcase something. I mean, we're the ones often answering those questions, but we're not the ones devising within each guild or within each section of the industry what programs need to happen. We're in touch with them constantly about the moves they're making. Within the city itself, it's like employment services looking at that, but that's in the broader scheme of the city. It's not about an industry particularly. So no, every sector of industries in the city does not have people looking at that for them or ensuring that, but it's working with the industry to do it. So I understand that this may not be like an amazing answer, but I don't know if there's any
I mean,
other
just
than
to add
showcasing.
At OMDC, we have the Ontario Film Fund. We've just included a diversity stream within that, which gives a certain bump to film fund recipients if they've proven they have a diverse, cast, story, talent, etc. The Film Commission has also partnered with ACTRA on their most recent diversity casting call or casting go-see, which again, put the 70 performers in front of critical decision makers. So we're doing a lot of work in that space to make it a reality.
Go ahead.
Hi, I formulated my question based off of the last question raised with regards to content, i.e. writing, and then the question that we previously just had with regards to diversity. And I believe you also, with regards to the content question, mentioned writing rooms being in LA, obviously, primarily. And I think throughout this discussion, we've talked about location, Toronto, obviously, cast, crew, but not content and sort of nurturing that as homegrown talent. So, of course, we have Atwood, Handmaid's Tale, who's a Canadian legend, established, but in terms of new talent with regards to creating the actual content that fuels this industry, without writing, without the work, then we can't film anything. What are we doing to bring out those artists and sort of develop them, nurture them, partner, so essentially mentor, partner them up with people? Because I'm finding you have either independent, so it's sort of a smaller scale where things are smaller, independent for newer talent, or you have established such as Atwood. So how are we getting the newer? Essentially, I'm a writer. How are we getting us? I want to be Atwood.
Yeah. You want a job. So is your question about how are we going to get domestic talent included more in the larger productions? Because right now it's
As
happening on the
writers.
independent production.
And also, to touch on it, we had also originally mentioned sort of diversity.
Yeah.
And not just multicultural, but women.
Yeah, gender.
So we're here. How are we getting us sort of partnered with the people that can make that happen?
Right,
Thanks.
because there are a lot of programs, or there are programs, domestic, that are supporting domestic artists to get that content made and to get more diversity in gender. But your question is specifically about the larger pictures that are coming to the province and to the city. What are we working on, or what are you guys working on in terms of supporting local talent?
Well, for us, again, it's smart partnering, meaningfully with the people that are creating those programs to amp them up. We mentioned the Writers Guild. We have the Toronto Arts Council that is very much involved in like arts, culture, development, and financing. So for us, it's partnering with those to make sure they're at the forefront of the messaging that we have, and we want to make sure that the messaging we have is a direct reflect on reality and not just like pumping numbers that are not there. So if ACTRA is gathering their numbers right now, we all want to know them and partner to do, as you said, like put real performers in front of real execs. It's putting real, it's mentioning the top 5 writers that we have right now that we think people should know when we talk to people looking to come here to do some development and not just production. You guys have maybe more like actual, like as you said before, like more like your production
I think the
incentives?
program at OMDC is the Diversity Film Fund. I think that's the only one that I know of, right? In terms of encouraging writers of color, encouraging directors and producers of color to apply to the OMDC, and then they get incentives if they, that's
correct.
Right. And Pinewood, you're just going to hire us, right? Miles, you're going to put us on your next movie? Good.
Yeah.
So.
Everybody.
Done. We only have time for one last question. So if there's somebody who hasn't asked a question. Oh. Great.
Hello.
I think, yep, go ahead.
I just had a question regarding, I know there's been a lot of talk of, production and development and talent and writers. I'm coming from the business side of things. Just a recently graduated MBA student. And when I was looking for, MBA schools to go to, I considered Canada and the US, and seeing in the US that, you can come from completely outside of the entertainment field and, be able to make the transition and have hands-on experience. And, a lot of companies in the U.S. have partnered with business schools in the U.S. To help nurture that talent. And I'm wondering, from the Canadian perspective, there's a lot of business schools in Canada, probably way more than our population actually requires. And I wonder from, your perspective, whether it's the City of Toronto or Pinewood International, or as a producer, what are you guys doing, or are there talks in the future to help be able to bridge the gap between, the fact that there's a lot of business talent, and at the end of the day, this is a business, and, being able to bridge that gap between the fact that there's a lot of business talent, whether it's from the undergraduate level or the graduate level, of people wanting to be able to work in this industry and contribute and bring value and all that kind of stuff.
I think that's such an excellent question because we often talk about the artist side and not the business side. But I would imagine the same challenges exist in bringing the business side here because so much of it happens in LA.
Fortunately for some of us, the business is the last refuge for the uneducated. Look, seriously, I think in terms of entertainment companies, that's something that would happen at a corporate level or at an entrepreneurial level in terms of developing. So, if you're a business person, you partner up with a creative person and you start your business. There aren't, a ton of big entertainment companies here. There are a couple of huge ones, then there are a few medium-sized ones, and there are many small ones. There are a lot more in Los Angeles, in our industry specifically. So it's tough, and it gets to be a very specific discussion about what the skill set is. Is it legal? Is it, in your case, MBA? And where you find your place. But I think, in a way, you have to probably be a little more entrepreneurial here than you might have to in the States, where, as a business person, you can catch on with, networks, the streaming services, the studios. There's a big swath of companies where there's a fit, and here there's just a little less of that, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, from Pinewood's perspective, in the UK, we have an apprenticeship program, and I mean it's mostly for below the line crew that come and they can learn the trade while working on production, while working at Pinewood. A few years ago, we partnered with Emerson and Wickham College, so we actually have a training program for our staff and for anyone who wants to get into studio management, which is completely different than production. Managing a studio is not, we work with production, but we are not producers. So yeah, a lot of companies are partnering with schools and making their own curriculum to train the people that they need to bring up. And I mean, there's something to be said about, pouring someone's coffee for a few years to learn from them. And it's an invaluable experience. That's how I got my start
For a
Probably
few
last-
years?
Okay.
Was it here?
No, it was. It was in the UK. In the UK, you pour a lot more coffee than in Canada.
Right. Or tea, I thought.
Like, do you
Yeah.
change coffees? Is it you
Well, it's tea.
working-
It's mostly tea.
Oh, tea. All right, that makes
I
more
learned
sense
what a
now.
builder's tea was.
Yeah.
Let's just say that when I was a
Yeah.
lot younger.
Yeah.
A lot younger.
I mean, I think, just to sort of wrap it up, because I know we're out of time, but also internships work differently here than they do in the UK and they do in LA, which sometimes makes it a bit more challenging to get into the companies here, just because we don't have the internships that they do in the States for all kinds of reasons that we can't talk about right now. But I want to thank everybody. Thank the panel first. And thank you guys, the audience. Thanks for coming out on a Friday morning for breakfast and participating in the panel. Thanks very much. Thanks, Tiff. Thanks, everybody.